What's up, everybody? This is Brad, and I'm sure by now you've heard the news. For those of you who are unaware, recently Nintendo issued a lawsuit to the developers of Yuzu, a Nintendo Switch emulator. Um, and Yuzu lawyered up, and I think everybody was kind of expecting this to go to court, and this was going to be a very interesting case to see if there would be some sort of actual concrete, definitive information established regarding the legality of emulation and how people emulate games and how emulators are made. But it turns out that this case is not going to go to court. Nintendo and the Yuzu devs have reached an agreement that the Yuzu devs will pay Nintendo $2.4 million in damages from the where they were claimed to have been enabling piracy with their emulator and some of the stuff they were doing. And they will also be forced to shut down the Yuzu emulator, all official builds of the game, their Patreon, and I think pretty much any social media page associated with Yuzu will be taken down as well, and the domain names for the website that hosted the builds for the emulator will belong to Nintendo now. On top of the fact that this is the same people who developed the Citra emulator, the 3DS emulator, that I actually just a few days ago downloaded because I was hoping to see if I could get it to work so I could maybe play some of the 3DS games I had bought, just because I think those would be pretty fun to check out. That is gone now too. Of course, unlike the Switch, the 3DS is a dead console. There's only like one more thing Nintendo needs to do to shut down regarding the 3DS before it is officially just gone. There will be absolutely no more support directly from Nintendo for the Nintendo 3DS and its online features. So, yeah, I think that that's the bigger problem here. And I just think that this sucks. I think it's awful. Primarily because Nintendo claimed that the emulator, the Yuzu emulator specifically, hurt their sales of The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, where they reported that, or supposedly they claimed that 1 million copies of The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom were downloaded illegally and played through the Yuzu emulator. Now, I would in my mind thinking there, Tears of the Kingdom was the first and I think so far only Switch game that was priced at $70 instead of the $60 usual price we get for a big Nintendo title. But yeah, they justified it and said, we gotta do this one for this. It won't become the new standard for Nintendo games, but we've got to charge $70 for this. So if we're doing the math, let's do the math. 1 million copies of Tears of the Kingdom would equate $70 million, correct? That's what I'm thinking. 1 million 70 times is 70 million. There you go, it's simple math. But they settled for 2.4 million. That's not even 10% of what they should have been, at least theoretically, asking for. I don't even know that Nintendo. I'm not even aware if Nintendo specifically asks for a monetary, or any specific price. But just going off of what Tears of the Kingdom was selling for and how many copies of the game supposedly were illegally downloaded, they went from where you would expect like 70 million. Maybe you could bump that a little up. Maybe you could bump that a little down, assuming that, hey, maybe not everybody who downloaded this thing illegally didn't pay for it already. Because, people do that. But even if you assume that every single download of this game was specifically to avoid paying for it, how do you, if you are trying to fight for, damaged product, or not, but not product, but there that you lost sales on this because this emulator's out there. How do you go from like this a million copies of a $70 game and you settled for 2.4 million? What are you like? That's nowhere near as much money as you could have said. That's not even. I said it's not even 10%. It's not even 5% of what they claim. What you would have been able to claim that you lost on this game. And I'm going to tell you why they settled for so little, especially when you think about how much money Nintendo did make from Tears of the Kingdom sales. From what I've been able to find, it seems that Tears of the Kingdom officially has sold at least 20 million copies, again, at $70. 20 million copies of Tears of the Kingdom sold. So a 20 million copies times 70 is $1,400,000. And I'm going to put this in my little calculator app here. I'm going to do it again. I already did this once just to make sure I was getting the numbers right. I got 20 million times 70. There you go. $1,400,000,000. I probably screwed it up when I said that before. But yeah, almost $1.5 billion in revenue. Of course, before you take out, cost and everything. But still, that's how much they sold that game. So you go from making almost $1.5 billion off of this game to settling for damages $2.4 million. That's pocket change. That is pocket change. Now, for most people, $2.4 million is like, a fortune. For Nintendo, no. That is like, it's nothing. Nintendo could lose $2.4 million and it wouldn't hurt them a bit. And that's why cases like this are so frustrating. Now, I've said before, I think it was when Kotaku did this big post on their site when like Metroid Dread came out. And they were like, hey, the best way to enjoy this game is through emulating it so you can get the best quality graphics out of it. So go emulate Metroid Dread today. I'm like, don't do that. Don't you, as a major website for gaming news and stuff like this, I just openly go like, hey, you know what? Don't play this on the Switch. Play it on through an emulator instead. Like, I thought that was a bad idea, even though I'd still think that like Nintendo, I'm still of the and despite what I think that Nintendo is horrible for this, I still am not the biggest fan of the idea of emulating modern consoles anyway. Any console still being actively sold in stores is, I think, a risky move, even though I don't particularly think, like I said, Nintendo's claiming damages here. They ain't been hurt by this. The Switch is, or even the emulator itself affecting the sales of the Switch, it hasn't. The Switch is probably the best, I don't think it's the best selling console Nintendo's ever had. I'm going to actually look that up really quickly. Because I thought it said, I actually think that the Switch is the second best selling Nintendo console ever. But there's just, but even though I do think like, hey, if you're using this to if you're using emulation to get around paying for new games, then I would argue that it's just simply a good idea to buy your games. I mean, you are paying to play the game on the system it was designed to be played on. But, and at least theoretically, that should be the best performance. If you're playing a game on the hardware an official copy of the game on official hardware that was meant to be played on, you should be playing at the best quality. It should be probably impossible to play this game at higher quality, but Nintendo doesn't do that. The Switch is or already was dated technology when it came out, and now I've always said that Nintendo has found a way to appeal to so many people and to just be completely successful without having the most complicated or powerful hardware out there. And they've done that well. They've managed to put out weaker consoles that still have fun games on them, and people still enjoy those. They're not, Nintendo's not going all in on like the super photorealistic graphics and stuff. So it's just frustrating that you can't, like the thing with, I'm just going to keep going back to it, and why I think that this was probably, ultimately, let me go back to what other point before. The reason why Nintendo decided to settle is because their main objective in this was just to get the emulator shut down. They weren't worried about money. They weren't worried about that. They can't be worried about money. They're making so much money. I think that their last quarter of whatever of their financial reports said that Nintendo actually had a pretty good last quarter, if I'm not mistaken. I don't have those numbers up, and I don't really feel like digging them up anyway. But I'm going to try to keep this video from being like 20 minutes long, if I can help it. But it's already 12 minutes because I'm just talking and talking. It's just aggravating, man. I mean, I wasn't using Yuzu. Let me just say this, because like I have a Switch. I'm sitting here looking at my recording setup where I've got my games and stuff. I've got my Xbox One S right here. I've got a Wii U in the middle. And a Switch dock with my Switch in it right here. On my shelf over here, I've got an NES and Super NES Mini. My Nintendo 3DS is over here too. Somewhere in storage, I've got an Xbox 360 that I don't know if it still works or not. I've got a PS2 that should still work. I think I've got a Wii somewhere. I don't know if it still works or not. And I hope it still works because it's ancient at this point, but I actually do have an original SNES. The last time I had it plugged up, it turned on and it played. So I have all these different consoles, and some of these, even some Game Boys that I think might still work. I have all these consoles. I buy games. Do I download some of these old like random Game Boy Advance games? Like I downloaded a bunch of Game Boy Advance games to put on a flash drive to test out in my At Games Legends Ultimate Mini arcade cabinet, because I thought it would be cool to have some unique kind of games on that cabinet that you can't get anywhere else. A lot of those old Game Boy Advance games are never going to see the light of day again. What are the odds that the Ed, and Eddie Game Boy game is going to get released again? Cartoon Network going to dig up Ed, and Eddie and put that on modern consoles? I would love to see anything like that happen. Or like an old Kim Possible Game Boy game. Some of these random games that are just you're never going to see again. Like, no matter what Nintendo says, like, yeah, they're going to put as many Mario games on the Nintendo Switch Online catalogs as they can. Except they don't, really. Except they don't. If you wanted to play the original Super Mario Land, that's not on Nintendo Switch Online. Super Mario Land 2 is. Only one Wario Land game is up. There are no Pokemon games up on those catalogs except the Game Boy Pokemon TCG game. Yeah, that was the one that people were really dying for. Not Red and Blue or Silver and Gold. Not any of those. I just don't know, man. It's awful. I and all this does is just remind me of what's going on with Warner Brothers and the Wile E. Coyote movie that's basically being destroyed so that Warner Brothers can get some money back for making it. Because that sounds like it makes a whole lot of sense. You spend tons and tons of money on a movie, and then you just decide that, I guess because David Zaslav, or how do you say his name, Zaslav, whatever, decides he didn't like Wile E. Coyote, and they're just gonna write it off and get money back for it instead of putting it in theaters. I mean, it's such a slap in the face to the people that make this media that even the voice actor for Bugs Bunny, Eric Balza, has been super vocal in support of getting that movie released in some way and speaking out against the higher ups at WB for destroying a Looney Tunes movie. The Looney Tunes are some of the most iconic characters in media overall. Bugs Bunny is like right below Mickey Mouse in terms of recognizable characters that have been around for decades and decades. And yet, here's this company flushing an entire movie down the toilet to get some money back on it because they don't care. And Nintendo doesn't care either. Let's not forget some of the things they've done. Like, they don't want you to play we all know they don't want anyone to play Super Smash Brothers Melee anymore. That they'll even shut down, like, people trying to emulate it for charities. They don't want you to play that anymore. They want you to go buy Super Smash Brothers Ultimate. You know, it's so fascinating because the logic seems to suggest, like, hey, you remember this game from this older console that you used to have, that you used to like? You should stop playing that game that you enjoyed and play these new games we made. Like, no, you shouldn't get to have both and be able to go back and forth between them. No, play Smash Ultimate and just never have Melee again. And I don't understand that logic because then, like, if you don't want people to play your old games, why even have these Nintendo Switch Online catalogs in the first place? Aside of the fact that you've paywalled them, you have to pay in order to use the Nintendo Switch Online, which I think is still kind of screwed up. You shouldn't have to pay Nintendo to just use the internet on their device. Not when anybody else nobody else is doing that. Because remember, Microsoft was still doing that, where they were locking even free-to-play games behind the fact, unless you're paying for Xbox Live, you can't even access free-to-play games online, and that was just like ridiculous. And that was when they were going to double the price of Xbox Live, and people were so mad that they actually reversed course and then made the change to allow people who, even if they didn't have Xbox Live, could still play the free-to-play games. So, yeah. But just a reminder, let everybody know, in case you forgot, the video game industry was the only industry during the pandemic with COVID that did not take a hit. It grew during that period. It was the only industry that saw growth from where people stayed home and they were playing games more because they decided they didn't want to go out. They didn't want to risk getting sick or getting somebody they cared about sick. And now you see how this is all playing out with how many of these different studios, everyone from even up to like Epic has laid off a ton of people. Because that growth they saw during COVID, it didn't last. People went back to work. People went back to going out and enjoying their lives other than just playing video games. And now the industry's going like, oh, well, we're not making as much money as we were before, so we got to get rid of all you people to make up for it. You know, not the CEOs, not the owners of the companies deciding like, you know what, I don't need to make, $50 million this year. I can settle for 40 or whatever. No, they're not even doing that. They're just like, no, we're going to get rid of all the little people down here, all you devs that actually build the games, all you artists that do artwork for our games. We're going to get rid of all of you. We'll replace what of you we can with AI, and then we'll just wait for more AI in the future to replace the rest of you. because that's all they want. They want to be able to churn out and fart out stuff quickly that will make them tons of money with minimal effort, and they don't want you to play games on dead systems that they can't profit off of. And in Nintendo's case, they don't even going after or making it to where Citra is also affected, even though the 3DS is a dead console. I mean, that's just kicking you while you're down. And like I said, I'm not a big fan of emulating current console, but guess what? I haven't seen anybody talk about a PS5 emulator or an Xbox Series X emulator, because those are kind of complicated machines. I bet it's going to take quite a while for anybody to figure out how to emulate those properly. And even so, an emulation is just kind of copying what the system is going to do. In a lot of cases, emulators sometimes struggle to run a game right, unless you can get a really good one. And those typically only are, a really good emulator tends to only kind of be for the really old games, the NESs, the Super NESs. Like, it's notoriously very hard to emulate or to get good emulation for a lot of Nintendo 64 games, which is why, hey, in this case, Nintendo putting out a Switch Online catalog for Nintendo Switch for Nintendo 64 games, it's actually a really good thing. And even though it was kind of screwy at first and it didn't work properly, there were a lot of visual errors because the emulator Nintendo runs just didn't have the right settings. They did eventually go and fix that. So, hey, maybe Nintendo should do more for this stuff. But instead, they give you very little, or they say, here, we'll give you what we want to give you. Like, oh, sorry we don't have the N64 Daffy Duck Dodgers game that you may have played when you were younger. We don't have that. And no, we're not going to accept that you may want to emulate that on your computer or whatever. So, you're just going to have to play what we have, and we're going to shut down anybody else who could potentially let you play that. Because we're probably not going to be willing to go and do business with WB to get the rights to the Daffy Duck game, because maybe even whatever company actually put that game together for us back in the day may not even exist anymore. So, I feel like all this is kind of tied. And seeing the way that media companies and like Disney and how some of these TV shows you see just get pulled from streaming services. Like, streaming was the future. It was going to be where you could go watch anything you want whenever you want. And slowly and surely people are starting to realize, one, they're slowly taking content down and charging more for the service. Netflix is doing that. Netflix will cancel a show like in the blink of an eye, and then up the price next month. All of them are doing that. Disney canned a whole movie that they barely promoted. Took it down. It's not coming back. So really now think when you're thinking about this stuff, and yeah, if you have a problem with the fact that the Yuzu devs were using a Patreon to make money and all that stuff, once upon a time, I think the emulator was called Bleem. You actually had to go and physically buy that in the store to get it, and they actually did win their legal case. Of course, the lawsuit there, the court case involving Bleem, I think it was Sony. That actually bankrupted the company, and they had to cease operations anyway. So they technically they won, but in reality, they got slaughtered. The cost of going to court to defend themselves bankrupted them, and they had to shut down the emulator. So just because you win or lose in court doesn't necessarily mean that you're gonna be okay. So I don't know, man. I'm hoping that this build that I downloaded of Citra will work, because like I said, I want to be able to share games with people that I played that I have on my 3DS, because trying to hook that up and make it run, I don't even think it's possible to actually run footage from a 3DS to a PC without some very hard to find hardware that maybe Nintendo were the only ones that actually had it. So I just want, like, and it just never will cease to amaze me. And I'm going to try to wrap this up because I'm almost at half an hour. Uh, it just blows my mind that Nintendo is one of, if not the most profitable companies in Japan. And here they are with a highly successful console that I believe sales are still, they're not as hot as it used to be, but the Switch is about to go into its 8th year. It's had a long, successful life, but people are still kind of buying these. It just blows my mind that this is the company that has decided to go out and be like, we are going to speak out against piracy. I'm like, you make more money than any other company in that country. You're the last company that should be shouting out about how piracy is hurting you. Especially when you've been when you were in the midst of a highly successful era in your company's life. The Wii U stunk. The Wii U was a disaster. And where the Wii U was disastrous for Nintendo, the Switch was miraculous. They turned it around. They went from having a console that people were like, this is my least favorite console maybe ever, or just maybe just the least interesting console they've ever had, to now having probably one of the best things that people I think will always look back fondly on the Switch, ignoring like the drift with the Joy-Cons and everything, in terms of the game library, in terms of the quality of the games themselves, and the being able to put the console on what's the name of this thing? The Switch port that will allow you to play it on your TV and then take it on the go, having all that and the Switch Online stuff for as bare bones as it really is. I think the Switch will go down as a very beloved console. So it goes back to me thinking about how Nintendo was claiming damages in this case against Yuzu. And I just want to know where the damages are. Beyond we sold 20 million, but you cost us 1 million in downloads. We only made $1.4 billion off of this. Where's that other 70 million? Like, this hurt us. And then having like these devs, I have no idea what the financial situation for these people who worked on Yuzu and Citra were, but I can probably guess that they don't have near as much resources as Nintendo does. So I'm sitting there thinking, in my mind, imagining Nintendo's lawyer getting up in front of a group of people in the courtroom and saying, this emulator for this system that's getting closer to 10 years old now, it really hurt us during this, incredible period of just of increased profits we had. We made so much money, but we could have made a little bit more if not for this emulator. If not for people dumping this game that sold 20 million copies. Like, it's just, Nintendo will always be like this, and I'm assuming that it, at least in part, is will be because of how strict Japanese copyright law is. We've seen this with, I always bring up Toei Animation's war against whatever government it was. I can't remember. And actually, they tried to get a government that was going to let people organize like a public showcase, a public showing of the finale of Dragon Ball Super, and they tried to stop it. Or they sent them some kind of message that was just like, we don't appreciate you showing our episode like this for free in front of everyone. And I'm like, and then the government was just, I don't even know if the government actually officially responded to Toei. They just did it anyway. Like, who are you to tell us what we do? We make the laws you operate under, buddy. And like, yeah, like in Toei's attempt to take down Totally Not Mark, we cannot forget about that. And the only reason that Mark, it seems like the only reason Mark won out is because Toei actually went around YouTube's uh, uh, rules for how to report violation of copyright. If they hadn't have, if Toei had not broken YouTube's rules in reporting that kind of thing, Totally Not Mark's channel probably would be gone. Now, maybe they could have fought that the way Team 4 Star did for so many years, uh, but it was a nightmare for them. So, yeah, just all that stuff, and just throwing in this how like Crunchyroll is shutting down Funimation, and a lot of stuff from Funimation is not going to be available on their website until they can get it properly moved over. And so once Funimation goes offline, there's going to be a lot of shows you can't watch legally anymore, not until they actually do something with that, assuming they will. And if you bought something from Funimation, they're not honoring the purchases. I think maybe they, I know it was at least initially that that was going to be the case because they warned people about that. But I think that the backlash from that kind of scared them, and I think they were trying to look for some sort of reconciliation with the people who own stuff on Funimation. So, like I said, there's just so many cases of this. The SAG-AFTRA boycotts where a lot of voice actors were like on strike, and they're like, we're not going to do this until you we're not going to act anymore until you give us protections against AI using our voices against our will to replace us, and so that we don't we lose out on our careers, we won't be able to work anymore. And SAG-AFTRA went behind all the voice actors' backs and made a deal with an AI company that apparently most even veteran voice actors did not know that the conversations with the AI company were even being had. So, as I've now gone over 30 minutes, I'm going to try to wrap this back up. It sucks. I mean, perhaps Yuzu should have not emulated a still current gen console. Maybe they should have waited until the next system came out so that there was less. Maybe it would have been less likely for Nintendo to have a claim that, that the emulator and these games are hurting their sales. Because there are plenty of other Nintendo emulators out there that have been around for a lot longer, and they're still standing. But, they are for older consoles too. Like long dead consoles, long out of print consoles. I'm like I said, I don't use Yuzu. I don't particularly care that much about how how many frames per second I can get a Zelda game to run at, or how HD I can get the graphics to look. But I think this is going to hurt emulation altogether because this was an intimidation factor. All that money, all the claims of damages, and they settled for what is effectively chump change for Nintendo. This was just to scare other emulators. This was to scare people before the next console comes out, to be like, you better not think about this. You better not think about emulating our new Switch, the Switch 2, the Super Switch, whatever they call it. You better not do it, or we'll do this to you too. Because we've got plenty of money. If you think you can take us in court, we'll come on. We'll drag it out as long as we need to and bankrupt you. And I just retweeted something. Let me go look that up because it was just literally, I think, the last thing I retweeted. A Switch hacker by the name of Gary Bowser was originally imprisoned for hacking his Nintendo Switch. But as part of his agreement with Nintendo, he will have to pay Nintendo 25 to 30% of any income he makes for the rest of his life. That dude, for hacking a video game console, will now have his whatever paychecks he gets garnished to Nintendo until the day he dies. That is just like messed up on some really crazy levels for a video game company. A what was originally like the family friendly video game company. Like, oh, you want to play this video game without giving us paying us money for it? Well, we'll imprison you, and then we'll take money from you. Then you'll just give us money the rest of your life. I mean, I think that we've got to stop. One, stop defending companies, any companies. They don't care about you. They only care about making money. That, two, any company claiming to be hurting is lying to you probably. For years, I heard anime voice actors claim that piracy was going to kill the industry. I was at panels with voice actors saying, like, if anime fans don't stop pirating anime when it's not got a dub, then the industry will crumble up and die. Fast forward to 2024, and former piracy site Crunchyroll is now a monopoly and controls 90% of all official anime releases in the United States. Oh, the irony. All the other anime companies over the years, like Ingenion, Pioneer, Bandai, whatever that, what was that? Bandai Visual, whatever that, how that one worked. The one that had like Outlaw Star and Cowboy Bebop and Ghost in the Shell. They're gone. Funimation is pretty much dead now. I mean, it already kind of was. And Sony has just been allowed to just buy up all these places. They bought up Funimation, Crunchyroll, and Right Stuff all within a fairly short amount of time, if I'm not mistaken. Like, relatively speaking, like, it was over, I think, a few years, but, like, still, like, Sony acquires Funimation. Sony then acquires Crunchyroll and decides to merge the two, ultimately deciding that even though Funimation has a much longer, name brand recognition, they chose to stick with Crunchyroll and retire Funimation as a brand. Then they bought Right Stuff, which is the big anime market place, the big anime online shop. So, just to add one more thing there, all these companies buying up all these other different companies. Same way the game companies have been buying up all these little indie studios and stuff. And then like Epic did, where Epic bought up a bunch of stuff. So they didn't have as much growth as they anticipated. So they started laying off like 16 to 18% of their people. Sold off some of the companies they bought. Like literally bought them, did nothing with them, and then sold them because they didn't make as much money. They didn't make as much money as they thought. Not that they didn't make money. Not that they didn't make a lot of money. They just didn't make as much as they expected to. At some point, people have got to realize it is not possible to grow infinitely. There is a point where you have maximized how much money you're going to get out of a product. You can't just keep growing. And at that point, you've got to change the product, tweak it some, or maybe come up with a new product. That's why, like, the NES is not still selling. The original NES. That's why now you have why NES games are on the Switch and why they made a mini NES. Because the original one just wouldn't cut it anymore. But anyway, I'm kind of tired of talking now, but this is bad. I hope it doesn't bleed over and affect. There's another Switch emulator that I'm not going to name. There's another Switch emulator out there that hopefully, if they're not, if they operate differently, they won't suffer the same fate. Um, and I don't know that, like, I don't think that, like, any PS2 or any PlayStation or Xbox emulators, any of these off-brand, like, or not off-brand, but just, like, stuff that's not supported anymore because the company's not doing consoles anymore, like any of the Sega consoles, I would imagine those would be safe. But I don't know. As far as just an emulator. But, like, emulation as it currently stands is supposed to be completely legal. The only time it's not is if you're using it to pirate your games. But even then, I would like, if you're going to take this route that emulation is just being used to pirate games, and it's having a negative effect on the industry, then I think we need to see some numbers to back that up. Because one, a Switch emulator is probably the only type of emulator for a current generation console that's out there. Like, the PS3 emulator is still kind of trying to figure out how to make certain games work. They only just recently got MVC2 to work online with that. And Sony says that we're moving into the latter phases of the PS5's life cycle. So, if PS3 emulation is only now starting to really get fairly impressive, and we're starting to, move closer towards the PS6 era, then that's completely different from this with a current gen Nintendo. But it just, crap, what was I saying? I heard something over my headphones and it made me lose my train of thought. Crap. I'll see if I can figure out what it was. But it's just sad. It's frustrating because I do think that oh yeah, that's what I was talking about. We need proof that this stuff is hurting. Nintendo, the Switch sold extremely well. Tears of the Kingdom sold extremely well, and I point that out because that was specifically named as the reason they were going after this this emulator, is because of the illegal downloads of Tears of the Kingdom. I've seen nothing to suggest the Switch was anything more than a tremendous success for Nintendo financially. And so, and the game itself, Breath of the Wild, big hit. Tears of the Kingdom, big hit. Lots of money made with those two games and this console. So where is the evidence that this is hurting the industry? That even if people are stealing games through the emulators just because they don't want to pay for them, I don't think that those people are enough to make a difference in how much money Nintendo is making. So, I don't know, maybe you'll agree with me, maybe you won't. But I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Getting close to the 45-minute mark now. Congratulations. Pat yourself on the back if you're still listening to me talk right now. I'm sorry. I know I tend to rant when I get in these because I try to remember things that I want to say because I don't prepare a script ahead of time when I do these types of discussions. I like to just sit down and talk. I get a general idea of what I'm going to talk about, and I just sit down and I just go. And wherever my brain takes me is where I go. And I try to add in anything I think could be potentially relevant or a good comparison to make, like I did bringing up the Wile E. Coyote movie and Crunchyroll and all that kind of stuff. Because it's all about media and how we consume it and how a lot of video games. One more thing. how video game companies are arguing now that when you buy a game digitally, or even if you buy a physical copy of the game, you don't actually own the game. You just own the means to play it. So they don't want you to be able to rip your game, put it on your computer, and then tinker with it that way. No, you have to. And if you they're trying to redefine ownership, and that ties back into the Funimation site going down to and everything like that. You don't own that stuff. If you buy something like these media companies don't want you to own anything. They want you to pay for a service that might have what you want today, but then they also reserve the right to be able to just take it down so that you have less to choose from later, and then probably up the price for it several times before you eventually just decide you don't need this streaming service anymore. You don't need this video game console anymore. You'll go do something else. Anyway, I've talked long enough. What do you guys think? Do you think that this is that Nintendo did the right thing? Do you think that Nintendo, like I think, was just throwing around their weight and trying to look big and bad and impressive to scare anybody potentially thinking of emulating their next console? Let me know what you guys think. I support emulators. I think that maybe it's risky to do current generation consoles, but I think it's not, even if you do it, it doesn't seem to be really hurting the sale of the actual console. Anyway, that's all I got. I'm out. See you later.